A decision is expected soon on whether China will be allowed to build a new super embassy in London. The Chinese government bought the site in 2018, but planning permission has still not been granted due to security and espionage concerns. With British Prime Minister Keir Starmer due to visit China this month, will it now get the green light? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, for 8 years, China has wanted to build a huge new embassy in London, but hasn't been granted permission by the UK government. Campaigners against it say it's a risk to the UK's national security. China says it deplores this delay. If it goes ahead, it will be China's biggest diplomatic outpost anywhere in the world.
Located in the heart of London, for decades it was where the British pound sterling coins were made. But for the past 8 years it's been owned by the Chinese government, and they want to turn it into their new embassy. The old Royal Mint building, directly opposite the Tower of London and a stone's throw away from the city's financial district, China's plans include an embassy house, a cultural exchange centre and even a set of underground tunnels. Local opponents, including the district council, argue the location could become a flashpoint for protests, disrupting traffic and negatively impacting neighbourhoods.
There are far bigger concerns, namely that this mega embassy could become a mega base for Chinese espionage, and politicians from across the divide have been sounding the alarm.
Mr. Speaker, the US government and now today the Dutch Parliament have expressed concerns about sensitive cables under the Royal Mint Court. Beijing has a recent history of cutting cables and confirmed infrastructure hacks, including embedding malware capable of disabling all that infrastructure.
The decision for the final go-ahead now lies with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. With his visit to Beijing scheduled in the coming weeks, it looks likely he will give the plans the green light. This will please Chinese authorities, who have been unhappy after years of delays.
China's application for the premises planning has been completed for a long time. The UK's repeated delay in granting approval is entirely unjustified, and the reasons they cited are untenable. China is seriously concerned and strongly dissatisfied. We will seriously assess the situation and safeguard our legitimate interests.
The UK is also trying to rebuild its own embassy in Beijing, which is also near sensitive locations, and has so far been refused permission. With the British Labour government hoping to make some big trade deals with their Chinese counterparts later this month, some planning permission approvals too might be on the table.
Well, let's meet our guests. I'm delighted to welcome here with me to the studio Isabel Hilton, founder of the China Dialogue Trust. Also here we have Charles Parton. Charles is a former UK diplomat who spent 22 years working in and on China. And Simon Cheng, a British Hong Kong exiled activist and a founder of Hong Kongers in Britain. And joining us remotely from Durham in the northeast of England, we have Chen. Ge is Associate Professor and Director of the Chinese Centre for Law and Policies at Durham Law School. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Isabel, to you first. How much friction do you think this has caused between China and the UK?
It's certainly been a source of irritation. It's gone on since 2018, so it's gone on for a long time. It was going to be a big prestige project, and from the Chinese perspective, it's been nothing but trouble. It's allowed many of the people who are hostile to China for good and bad reasons to have a big airing. That's always irritating to the Chinese. And it comes up. It comes up in meetings. It came up, I was in China in December, and it came up then. So it still is a source of considerable irritation, yes.
Charles, to you, just the diplomatic reading of all of this, people build embassies, they extend them all the time, but China has been knocked back repeatedly. What's your reading of the issues?
Well, first of all, China, quite rightly, I think, wants a bigger embassy because it's been in that one for many, many decades, just as we need a bigger one in China. And there aren't that many sites in London, and that's obviously one that's prestige and puts all their people together, and they want all their people together. But the three big issues are one, are there security cables running beneath the embassy, which would be a threat from them being there? Two, is it going to be an espionage centre? And three, is it going to be a base for transnational repression and seizing of people and putting people in dungeons? I think there's an awful lot of overwrought speculation in the press on all those three issues as it happened.
Charles, you mentioned cables that run under that area of London. The financial district is very, very close by. Is there a concern that those cables could be tapped into or information could be kind of hijacked?
Well, that is precisely the concern, and I'm assuming that our security services, GCHQ and our protection services, have looked very carefully at that and come to a decision as to whether they can be rerouted or protected in some way. If they can't, then the answer is very obvious to the Chinese. I'm awfully sorry, but that site is a no-go.
Thank you, Charles. Simon, what are your concerns then?
Well, the concern definitely is about the national security, also is about our own safety of the exile community. Not only me, but also large amounts of the people coming from Hong Kong, and many of those, they might be from Xinjiang, Tibet, and even Chinese dissidents that they seek asylum in the UK on British soil, that they have a legitimate concerns and reasons to be fair that if China, that the Chinese diplomats to be their working place would be upgraded with the diplomatic impunity, and they could place more staff here for civilians, and that's what we concern. That is more likely is about the symbolic significance, because that is right next to the Tower of London, and it looks really like a palace-style building, and it could be emboldened their confidence that they could trampling on the freedoms even on the British soil. That's what we feel uncertainty. We're waiting for the British government to show resolute determination to safeguard the national security. And this kind of the case, whether they will approve this kind of the upgrade, would be very, very important limit test for the UK government.
Thanks, Simon. Go to you. You've followed this story for many years now. Just how awkward a position does it put Keir Starmer in as he prepares to head to Beijing at the end of the month?
Well, I think it's definitely a good example of somebody would question that politics interferes with the planning process. And formally, planning decisions are meant to be technical and evidence-based, but in reality, when a case assumes clear national security or, let's say, foreign policy implications, it's almost impossible to keep it purely administrative. So this, I think, for what's unusual here is not just that politics plays a role, but how visible that role has become for the Prime Minister. And the government now calling in this decision shows that there's no longer no longer just a planning process, but it's being treated as a matter of national significance. And that doesn't necessarily mean the process is illegitimate. Many countries would reserve the right to intervene when there's a infrastructure that has diplomatic or security implications. But definitely, it now overlaps with a high-level UK-China engagement, including this potentially a prime ministerial level visit, and that inevitably makes the decision more sensitive. So any delays in making decision might reflect not just indecision itself, but the difficulty of aligning national security assessments with foreign policy signals.
Thanks, Go. Isabel, to you. So we're told there will be a decision on January 20th. Clearly it's going to go ahead because Starmer can't go to Beijing with this having been knocked back.
I think that's right. And I think that the British government's view, look, there are two things. You've got to manage the domestic front, and there will be a lot of noise from the right wing of the Conservative Party and from other interested parties if the decision goes ahead. On the other hand, I think the British government views this as a fight we really don't need to have. because if you turn it down, you have to have very robust reasons for turning it down. And frankly, the security services have said this is a problem we can manage. So what exactly are the reasons for turning it down? You know, the Chinese spy on Britain, of course they do. They don't necessarily need a larger embassy to spy on Britain. They can, you know, post their espionage activities anywhere. And I think the same is true for transnational repression. It's not necessarily the embassy that you need to look for agents of transnational repression. These things happen, but they're not really to do with the building necessarily. And if that means, if turning it down means that relations between the UK and China go into another dive, if it means that we can't upgrade the embassy in Beijing, which it very much needs, then I don't see who wins here.
Charles, to you, where are those relations right now? Because we had a golden age with David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister. Then we had an ice age, if you like. Where do you think relations between the UK and China stand right now?
I'm a little bit sceptical when it comes to relations between whether one can describe them as golden or ice. And indeed, the importance of what are good relations? Everyone likes to make noises about good relations, but actually, let's look at the concrete, practical things that are going on underneath. Are our exports? I'm less worried about trade. Ministers always talk about trade. No, let's talk about our exports. What about investment? What about people-to-people relations, tourism, academia, etc.? These are the basis of relations. And whether you want to call them good relations or golden or ice, quite frankly, is not as important as the substance. And when ministers come back, and I've been in the British Embassy for some years, and they say, well, as a result of this visit, we've brought back X billion, or in Rachel Reeves' case, only a paltry 600 million, in contracts. We all know that those contracts, A, would have gone ahead already, and probably already have, or these are memoranda of understanding, and they may not. I mean, ministers, it's good. We want ministers to go to China. They should, and they may learn things. But I don't think we need to set such store about it and characterize it as, and play the Chinese game, actually, of labeling these things. Let's just get on with it. And the other thing about it, which I think is also important, is it is playing the Chinese game. They like to label things and put pressure on us and say, well, but now you've been in the ice age. But actually it's not. If you look at the British exports to China, they fell during the golden era, and they reached their record in 2022 and 2023 when we were in the so-called ice age. I think that makes the point that politics aren't quite as important as politicians like to think they are.
Thank you, Charles. Simon, to you, as a young Hong Konger in London, what are your concerns about your activities being monitored by this so-called super embassy, which a lot of people fear will just become a big spy base?
Well, the Chinese government never ever hide their determination to hunt down on us. We are the exile activity, even we're just simply speaking out, being vocal against the Chinese government policy. And that's quite enough for them to see us as a criminal and violating national security, so-called national security. And that's why we have a very legitimate reason that we have such kind of the fear. And going back to the UK government, how that's to handle it. Although we understand security service, they said they can manage it well for the upgrade plan of the Chinese embassy. However, based on the track record, you can see the CCP suspected espionage case have been suddenly dropped in the UK, and you can still see some ongoing espionage case waiting to be on trial by the courts in the UK. So it's uncertainty. We never ever seen even one single case that have been sentenced by the UK court and saying that we are determined to safeguard the national security of the UK. And besides, you can see the foreign influence scheme. They haven't made their own mind to put China to be an enhanced tier instead of Russia and Iran, and it giving us that whether the UK government be determined to safeguard and to protect us, and that is the key point.
You used the word fear there earlier on. Is there fear in the Hong Kong community in the UK?
That is very, very common fear, and I would not say that as a paranoia, because it's black and white on the paper, the national security law from Hong Kong hunting down on us. So that is what we hope that the UK governments could have a countermeasure to tackle such transnational repression.
Thank you. Good. To you, assuming this gets the green light then in a few days' time and China starts building, I would imagine they will make up for lost time very quickly.
Approving an embassy does not equal endorsing that country's policies, I would say. I think the controversy now is less about the building itself than about what it represents politically. For the UK, of course, this comes at a moment when the China policy is being reassessed after many years of mixed signals, like what you just talked about, golden age, followed by a sharp freeze, and there's now some attempt to find a more stable middle ground. The embassy debate has now become a focal point for wider anxieties for human rights issues and national security and political influence. But diplomatic presence is a basic feature of international relations, even between countries that strongly disagree with each other on some fundamental values. So what the UK seems to be moving toward is now a more pragmatic approach, neither idealizing China itself nor treating engagement itself as a security failure. So you can maintain diplomatic channels while still being firm on human rights, rule of law, and national security.
Thank you, Guy. Isabel, to you, do you have any sympathy for Keir Starmer here? Because the Conservatives kicked this can down the road for several years, and it's now in his in tray, and it's very awkward.
It is awkward, and yes, I do have some sympathy because it's the kind of high symbolic issue where the symbolism and the importance are not really aligned. You know, the degree of irritation that this has caused is not really, in my view, to do with anything very material. You know, there are reasons why the Chinese want a big embassy. You know, they have staff scattered all over London. They don't employ local staff for a number of functions that other embassies would. So they have a lot of people. They want to have them all on the same site and so on. And, you know, I think that you know, Boris Johnson said was very pro this whole project. The now ex-ambassador, Chinese ambassador to London, bought it. Neither of those gentlemen are much in favour at the moment, and Keir Starmer's left to clear it up. So it's an awkward issue. But I think his main problem is managing the domestic blowback, the sort of noise that the Conservative Party headbangers will make about this, when in fact they're the ones who agreed it in the first place. And that has to be managed. But in terms of relations with China, as I say, it's a fight you don't have to have. And I think if you want to put a flaw under these relations, which I believe the government does, then just let's move past this and get on with more substantive issues.
Charles, would you agree with that? Let's move on.
Yes, I would. And I think also from the security point of view, it's rather better having all the Chinese in one place than spread around 7 or 8 sites around London. And particularly in a modern technological age, I find it very hard to imagine that the Chinese would run any sensitive intelligence operations out of the embassy, because that's a magnet for attention. And ditto, in the very unlikely event, the first time since 1896, when they seized someone on the streets of the UK and put them in a dungeon with the intention of taking them back to China, that was Sun Yat-sen in 1896. The last place you want to put him would be in an embassy. That's not to say that they wouldn't necessarily do this sort of behaviour after 100 years. I think what Simon has said, and I fully support everything Simon says about the way that there is interference in our country, in our freedoms, in our rights, in the safety of our citizens, 100%. I just don't think, I agree with Isabel that the embassy is not that important in that very important debate.
And Charles, can I just ask as well, 22 years working in China, how badly needed is an upgrade on the British embassy in Beijing then? Because that hasn't been signed off in spite, really, of what's gone on here.
Well, yes. I mean, when I was there in the mid-'80s, I can't remember how big our staff was, maybe it was 50, and it was relatively comfortable. When I was back there working in 2017 in that embassy, it was bulging at the seams and had hardly been touched in the intervening, whatever that is, 30-odd years. So it very badly needs work, because the staff in China has increased exponentially. But that won't be the end of the problems, of course. I mean, I think there are going to be arguments about who builds it, because they certainly don't want the Chinese to build it in China any more than they want us to build theirs here, because they'll we will be worried that they will sow it with microphones and other nasty bits of technology. So I don't think the arguments will cease if on January the 20th or whenever Keir Starmer goes to Beijing, there's a nice signature, and yes, you can have your embassy and we'll have ours. That's probably when they begin.
And tell me, Charles, do you think once Starmer signs off or an agreement is made that the Chinese get their super embassy in London, the payback will be the UK can upgrade its facilities in Beijing?
It's undoubted that there's a connection. There has been for all the time. The Chinese always play that game of connecting A with B, or indeed with something completely extraneous if they want to get their wish on something.
Thank you. Simon, why does China take such an interest in the activities then of young Hong Kongers living in the UK, so far away?
Because they see every critical critics would be seen as a political threat to them, and that they cannot tolerate any dissenting thoughts. And what you had seen is really clear example what happens in Hong Kong. So-called Hong Kong with the one country, two system is now not being honoured anymore. And we haven't seen that the UK will be just like to stand firm for it, to let the Chinese government to know that as a consequence. So we're waiting for more determinations that have been done and made by the British government. But back to to this embassy plan, I think the people, the residents and the exile community are seeking clarity that whether the security service would be really well managing such kind of the risk, because we haven't still seen any cases since the national security law in the UK have been approved and have been passed. There's no successful case yet, and that's the main concern we have seen. But more importantly, I think, what kind of the message that the UK government would like to send to the world, to our residents, if we don't share the values with the Chinese government, they're authoritarian regime. And if we would like to make a deal with them to let the diplomats, the unelected officials, to live and work in a glamorous palace-style building in central London, what kind of the message would be sent to the world? I have such a concern about it.
And Simon, can I ask, when Keir Starmer goes to Beijing, would you like to see him bring up the case of Jimmy Lai?
Definitely. I think that our Prime Minister should draw a very clear red line, crystal clear red line, to ask that as British national and citizen Jimmy Lai should be returned to the UK. Because he did nothing wrong. He speaks for a free media, the journalism. It's about integrity of journalism that we should safeguard. It's not just about economic interests. And besides, it could be a trickle-down economy coming back to the UK. What we're focusing on is our Prime Minister stand firmly for the human rights and principle of liberal democracy, and that is not negotiable.
Thank you, Simon. Ge, to you, just as Starmer prepares to head to Beijing then, this is quite a diplomatic tightrope to be walking.
Yes, the controversy itself reflects the British government's broader uncertainty. I think not just the British government, perhaps governments around the world, uncertainty about how democracies should manage relations with a powerful but non-liberal state like China. So approval it or not, I think it should be understood as part of the managing a complex relationship and not showing any sign of political concession. I think it shows also that the relationship between China and the UK is entering a more sober and institutional phase, because the UK is no longer talking about just golden age, but it's also moving away from purely reactive policies. Instead, the focus is now on governance itself and how to deal with China as a major global actor in, say, trade, technology, diplomacy, security, without any illusions, but also without panic. The embassy debate is a good example of that kind of learning process. So going forward, I think we are likely to see more of these kinds of debates, perhaps less about ideology, but more about how rules or institutions and safeguards can be used to manage the differences. And that itself, I think, is a good sign of a more mature and realistic relationship.
Thanks, Ge. Isabel, to you, just as we conclude the conversation, talk to me about blowback in the UK then. You mentioned that phrase earlier on. Assuming this is all signed off, how much heat will the Prime Minister get for this if he greenlights it?
Well, as you know, the Prime Minister isn't doing terribly well in the polls in any event. And there is a constant pressure from certain elements, particularly in the Conservative Party, on China, where there is a great deal of pressure, but not many solutions, frankly. And I think that this will be a distraction from the very real security problems that we do have with China, and I have no illusions about China and our relations with China, but I think that they are more to do with the issues around technology and trade than they are with the embassy. But any issue, particularly an issue of high symbolic significance like the embassy, attracts absolutely hysterical vocal criticism from certain members of the Conservative Party in particular.
Charles, to you, what advice would you give Keir Starmer then as he heads to Beijing?
To understand that they will be trying to present a Potemkin view of China, but to take every opportunity to understand how the Chinese Communist Party thinks, and then he can come back and use that in setting out a more, shall I say, pragmatic policy towards China.
Thank you, Charles. Isabel, Simon and Chen in Durham in England as well. Thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.